Well, to my surprise, through the letterbox today, I had a letter from the royal family. Thankfully, it was from the Queen and not from a certain prince, and it's congratulating us on reaching 100. How does it feel to be old, Stu?
Well, I've felt that way for a very long time now. I'm 46 and I've felt ancient for about, probably a good 4 years or so. So it's nice to be recognised by Her Majesty.
Yes. Yes, and definitely not from any of the children's.
Of course not. And, we're such staunch monarchists, aren't we? We love the monarchy here on,
we do.
On Man at MHG. Yeah.
I mean, I've not made comments about the Queen's sex life, Prince Philip's death, and the exploits of certain princes. No, we're staunchly behind them all the way.
Oh, yeah. Hand wave away all of that, alleged noncery. No problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
But do you know what the real royal family is?
What's that?
Because they have blue blood. As you see where I'm going with that one?
Kind of.
Tenuous leak time.
Go on.
We're not going to do what have you been playing, Stu. We're going to talk about blue skies and blue hedgehogs. It's a Sega special. Let's take us into it.
Yes, indeed. So, pretty special for the 100th episode. We thought we'd finally make good on the promise to cover Sega in proper detail because, let's face it, they really deserve it. And yeah, such a big topic, it needs a dedicated episode. And so, let's get started.
Early to mid-80s, and the Super Scroller era.
So, Sega, they were there or thereabouts arcade developer in the 70s and early 80s. They had a lot of commercial success with Zaxxon and Frogger and the like, but personally I didn't stumble across many of their sort of bigger titles in my early arcade going years, at least not until 1985 and their version of Choplifter, and that's just suddenly seemed to be everywhere. And they powered on through 85 and released loads of great titles, most prominently probably the seminal sit-down experience that was Space Harrier.
Yes.
They showcased some fun 2D side-scrollers throughout the 80s, and these ended up forming the backbone of their home console success on the 8-bits and 16-bits. We'll talk about those machines in a bit, but in the arcades in the mid-80s, their brilliance was found in the boundary-pushing Super Scrollers. Those are 3D-styled parallax sprite games using technology that didn't so much blow the competition away as detach it from Earth's gravitational field and kick it into the cosmos. We're talking Afterburner, Enduro Racer, Thunderblade, Super Hang-On, lots of others, and they ensured people kept stuffing coins into Sega's gigantic hydraulic cabinets. It was a legendary OutRun that sat as king of them all, though. It's a true classic, the pinnacle of Super Scroller design. Sega Blue Skies and hummable tunes, and they blended perfectly into a unique racing and tourism sort of hybrid experience. So,
yeah. I defy anyone who is over the age of 30. I'm on about into sort of like our 40s, those in the 50s now. Not if they go into an arcade in any seaside town and see an OutRun cabinet there with the Ferrari set up still and everything, not to look at that and go, I've got a spare pound. I should really, shouldn't I?
I know.
You just have to. That's OutRun. It's probably the most iconic for me. Even though it's not my favourite arcade game, it's probably the most iconic arcade cabinet I can think of.
Yes, it probably is. It's really strange because in the game, you're driving this swanky Ferrari, it's like rendered as well as they could for the time. And it does look like the Ferrari. I think it was a Testarossa or, it was around that kind of era of Ferraris. Yeah. But the arcade cabinet with this silly little chibi kind of squished, funny looking little thing, so that it wasn't gigantic. And I think that probably helped because the game was very gorgeous, but very sort of challenging.
Yeah.
But the little cabinet itself was just cute. It's just this cute bit of like, this fiberglass, cute fiberglass cabinet. And yeah, you're entirely right. You can't see something like that and not want to just throw yourself at it immediately.
Yeah. There was one, I want to say the Trocadero, there was one in London.
Yeah.
but it was that, and there's a Rage Racer one as well. But I mean, come on. But Sega always go the extra mile with their arcade cabinets. Even Virtua Tennis, when that came out, it wasn't sort of like set out like that, but it had proper sit-down benches that were part of the arcade cabinet.
Yeah.
And it was like, this was Sega going, do you know what? You're going to be here a long time. Have a seat.
Yeah.
They just knew. And what was it, Afterburner, which was the one that I was on, the full hydraulics that spun you around and everything?
Well, there was a cabinet they built, which was called I think it was the R360, and that was the one that could do full. Yeah, and it was showcased with Afterburner and I think G-Lock as well.
Yeah, again, I want to say that was at the Trocadero. But I've definitely played on it, and it was like, my God, it's like, that's real. And I remember sort of like we speaking, a couple of friends of that would be saying sort of like, this is going to end up in the home one day, and it never quite did. But oh my God, they were experiences that no one else could bring.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were your top 3 favourite of those Super Scrollers? I can go first if you like.
Yeah, you go first. Go on.
Yeah, so my top 3 Super Scrollers are number 3, Power Drift, which was a little kind of buggy game where you drove around these like wooden plank roller coaster style things, and they had really great kind of up and down kind of verticality to them. It was really, it's kind of, Super Scrollers were fantastic, but they did have a little problem with collision detection, and Power Drift kind of struggled with it more than most, but it was just so over the top and so daft and so willing to be silly that I really loved that one. Number 2 is OutRun, that we've just rhapsodised about, and not because it's not the best, because it is the best, but we're talking favourites, and my favourite is Space Harrier, which I already mentioned. And when I was a kid, it was the first kind of hydraulic-y, moving cabinet that I ever sat in and played. And for those who don't know, it had a massive joystick in the centre. Yeah. And you sat down and like put your money in, and it went, welcome to the fantasy zone, get ready. And then you're this little guy with like a rocket propelled gun under your arm, and you fly around these 3D levels shooting at space dragons and stuff, and it's just mental. And the cabinet itself just flung itself around in a way that health and safety nowadays would probably scream at you for. I remember, my much smaller hips and bum getting flung around at 8 years old doing that. And
you got bruised back in those days.
You did, yeah. But yeah, it was phenomenal, and I just loved it.
Yeah, no, that's 3 good choices there. And you'll have to tell me if these are all counted or not, but for me, Super Hang-On, was that Sega? That was Sega.
It was,
so it had to be Sega. Yeah, that was brilliant. The bike, because they gave you like a what felt like full size when I was younger, but clearly it would have been scaled down a bit. But you got your bike to ride on, and that's never been better. I can't play motorbike games apart from Road Rash without now wanting an arcade bike between my legs, because they just don't feel right on a controller. Then Afterburner, because that was just my first full experience of being thrashed around properly. And I mean, this is going to be obvious, but OutRun.
Yeah.
Because it's OutRun. I don't know what else to say. It's just, sometimes that's just the answer, because...
Yep, I entirely agree. Afterburner just fell outside, but it definitely appears later on for me. It's, such a good game.
But the problem you have, and we'll talk about this maybe with when we move on to like the 3D arcade machines and stuff like that, is a lot of these you can play at home. I've been tinkering with retro stuff recently, and I'm definitely going to try some OutRun, and I'm going to try a bit of Afterburner and things like that. And yeah, they scratch a bit of an itch when you're playing them on a monitor at 4K and stuff like that. But no, you need to be in a dirty, cigarette-smelling, sweaty, dark, dank arcade with God knows what disease is over the thing you're sitting on and touching, being thrashed around to get the full experience. It doesn't quite do the same when you're sat at home in front of a small monitor.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that those ones in particular, even more so than the 3D era that we'll come into in a bit, I think those Super Scrollers really have that embedded in their DNA that you need those hydraulic hydraulic cabinets.
I mean, I did always want a Shenmue forklift arcade game with an actual forklift. And why Sega didn't do that, I don't mind you. We're heading towards the days of Sega changing, but that just like anything Sega, just make it. You made arcade cabinets.
Yeah, that's right. And zipping back to those times,
the Master System and Mega Drive, the true home of Sega 2D arcades.
Alongside their expensive and technical showcases that were 3D wonders, they continued to pump out high-quality 2D platform games at the same time, often shooters, and they had an addictive hook. Most of them couldn't compete with Capcom Konami or Taito's Best, but their standard was always pretty high, and the likes of Wonder Boy or Fantasy Zone in the mid-decade paved the way for even more finely tuned experiences as the 80s started to wrap up, most notably in the form of Shinobi and Golden Axe. And the true home of these titles ended up being the two big Sega console releases of the 80s, the 8-bit Master System and its successor, the 16-bit Mega Drive.
Yes.
Not only were all the above arcade games present and correct on both systems, they all received sequels that often outdid their progenitors. You know, an amazing way to justify the purchase to your parents and also to bring the arcade experience home. The Master System port of Wonder Boy is solid, but the two sequels to that are absolute classics. All the Fantasy Zone titles are great on both the junior and the senior machines. Golden Axe was a technical marvel, and it on the Mega Drive, and even adds new levels to the 16-bit version. And Super Shinobi, aka Revenge of Shinobi, on the Mega Drive is considered by many to be the best in the franchise. The Master System was comparatively short-lived and didn't really gain traction in the US, but that saw many fantastic ports as well. And it brought a lot of quality homegrown titles to the table. Things like Safari Hunt with the light phaser and Space Harrier again, but with the 3D glasses. And that showed Sega doing an envelope-pushing side to the outside of the arcade for the first time. And stuff like Phantasy Star and Psycho Fox still hold up today and are still worth playing.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the Mega Drive, though, conversation sort of inevitably drifts towards the Speedy Blue mascot. It's no exaggeration to say the first Sonic game propelled the machine to the big time, at much the same pace as that hedgehog. The NES had gained such a foothold in the US and Japan that the Super Nintendo was already a surefire hit. But the SMS itself had faltering starts in those territories, making the future prospects of the Mega Drive or the Genesis in the US much less certain. But alongside Sonic, Sega kept things varied and interesting with Shining Force, Rystar, Shinobi 3, eSWAT, Columns, Phantasy Star Games, and a load of others, and a big slew of ports. And even the polygonal stuff like Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter got a run out. So yeah, a really amazing era. And the one that cemented Sega as a big force in the home, even though looking back, it lacked some traction because of that power and dominance of the NES. But, the games that came out were really excellent. So I think it's worth going through our top 3 Master System Mega Drive games. So again, I will go first.
Oh,
We are splitting them.
Are we splitting these?
It's going to be hard enough just doing them as separate, but yeah. So for me, my top 3 Master System games made by Sega are at number 3, Fantasy Zone 2, which was, it might not be as good as the first one even, but on the Master System itself, Fantasy Zone 2 was a bigger cartridge. It was more sort of luxurious, and it was, a better tweaked and tuned game for that platform. And it's just great looking. It does silly and kitschy things that you don't see in a lot of shooters. It's normally something you associate with puzzle games or with, platformers for kids. But it was a brutal game underneath this lovely outside external sheen. At number 2, Shinobi. I love the Master System version of Shinobi. It's very different to the arcade, but equally good in its own ways. Great fun. And at number 1, Wonder Boy 3, The Dragon's Trap, which got a kind of update remake recently where you can play it with new graphics or switch between those and the retro graphics. And that looks amazing. It's one of the nicest looking 8-bit home console games ever made, and is such a good game.
Yeah.
So what about yourself?
So, Master System wise, it's like I had a little look back through, and I can't really put them in any particular order. So, Thunderblade was a game I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Maybe not as well regarded today as it was, maybe. I don't know if it was well regarded back then. It was the late 80s, so I didn't care about what other people thought. I just know that I really enjoyed flying a helicopter and having shootouts with the helicopters.
Yeah.
I was 7 years old. But yeah, that was one that really stood out to me. And again, I don't know where other people stand on this, but Alex Kidd in Miracle World.
Yeah.
Absolutely adored that game, and I really like the rock paper scissors mechanic. I don't know. Again, I got no reason for it. I just really enjoyed playing it, and I know it's not one that's fondly looked back on with some people. So, but yeah, no, for me, I really, really like that. And then I think you mentioned it as well, but Shinobi, sorry.
Yeah.
Shenmue's not making any top 3, by the way. I don't know where that came from, but Shinobi, that was just absolutely fantastic. But I do one that's going to miss out on both, actually, and I do want to give it just a bit of a shout out as a novel mention, but Columns. I was a really big fan of Columns because it was a puzzle game, and I love puzzle games, but that's not going to make any top 3. But I just, it never gets the respect it's due, I don't think.
Yes. It was a much... in a time when puzzle games were not... on the home consoles, are not like home computers. People didn't buy them because they were too expensive. Like, I remember the cost of... Until you started getting, like, compilation packs towards the end of the Mega Drive's life. And then the rental market, which was much bigger in the US than it was in the UK, but still existed in the UK. That sort of game you only really found on, like, your dad's PC, or your mate's Amiga or ST and stuff like that, because, you didn't have to... Most of the time, you didn't have to pay very much money for them, or you could pirate them. Whereas, buying Columns on the Mega Drive would cost you as much as Sonic, and which kid is going to go for that? Well, obviously the answer is you. But apart from you,
no. Well, we'll cut that off. No, Sonic still first. if you're going to go down that route.
Yeah, no, I'm just messing. But yeah, I think they've really flourished in the era of. The media being cheaper so that they can price the games a bit cheaper, and it was unfairly overlooked at the time, I think, a little bit, yeah. Yeah,
definitely. But as I say, I know generally I might be in a bit of a minority with it, but me and puzzle games.
I do.
So, but yeah, Mega Drive, that was definitely... well, we all know what the Mega Drive was. It does what Nintendo don't.
It does. And that was an entirely accurate statement because, it's a different machine. It doesn't mean it's better, that statement. It just means it's different, doesn't it? And I loved the SNES. I absolutely loved the SNES. And I can't go which one is better than the other. I can just say what's great on the Mega Drive. So for me, the best Mega Drive games that were by Sega were at number 3, Sonic 2, at number 2, Golden Axe, and at number 1, Shinobi 3. And most of those speak for themselves, but just Shinobi 3, if people didn't play it that much, it's not a surprise. It was right towards the end of the life of the Mega Drive. I think it was about 93 or 94, and, the PS1 was just coming out, so I don't think that many people bought it, but it's absolutely solid fried gold, It's one of the best Shinobi games, and I'm an absolute Shinobi obsessive, and you can still, if you go onto our YouTube channel, you can still see my 1 credit completion of the arcade game. But yeah, no, it's absolutely phenomenal, and for me, it's the best one on the Mega Drive, and for me, the best Sega game on the Mega Drive as well. But I think I'd probably be in a minority.
No, it's not a bad shout, and it's good to have personal preference, because I think sometimes you accept that this is the best game in terms of critical reception, fan reception, everything, but it doesn't mean it has to be your favourite or your best. Hence the reason my number 3, and I'm going to say come at me, is Toe Jam and L, Panic on Funkatron.
Oh, right, yeah, cool.
I know a lot of people prefer Toe Jam and L. They're wrong, but I enjoyed the 2D side-scrolling type affair of Panic on Funkatron, and I was obsessed with standing there and dancing in the game because it allowed you to do that. It was just incredibly fun to play, and again, that's what I was always been about. I think with games is it fun? Well, yeah, then that'll do me.
Yeah,
and I don't know whether I can put this because it's a Sega published game, but it's Virgin developed, and that's Aladdin at number 2.
All right, yeah.
Are we allowing that?
I'll allow it.
We'll allow it. Good. I really, again, the 1992, what was it? I would have been 10, 11, depending on when it was, and it was just amazing for me. It was like I saw the film and then there was the game, and at the time it actually looked like you was playing the film to my young eyes, and it just blew me away. And again, technically not the best on the system, best game, but it just held something within me that I absolutely I just played the hell out of that one. Again, back in those days where you might have one game for that year, just hammered the hell out of that. And at number 1, Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Yes.
The single player was fine, but those races, why have we not done more of the racing section? Because that was spectacular.
Yeah.
Quick laps around levels, but they were shortened down. And it was just fun. 2-player, why is that not still a thing? Why have they not made more Sonic games based on that? They tried going 3D and everything, but that 2-player mode was amazing.
Yeah, I think the history of Sega is just riddled with why have they not ? And why did they do this? But that's one. I think they should have that thing. I think that might have been present in Sonic Advance or some of the later Advance games, but
possibly. But who played them?
I know, typical with Sega. They bury later on. They bury a lot of innovation in platforms and games that people are not playing, or it's got a smaller reach.
I think if they was to do a Sonic Mania based version of the Sonic 2 racing levels, and that's all it was, and charged full price for it, I'd buy it.
Yeah.
You've got the engine. That's the thing. They've got the engines. Why Sega?
I don't know. That's the easy answer with Sega. I don't know. Because you never know what's going through their stupid heads, because they're sitting on gold and they so rarely mine it. It's crazy. Yeah. But
you said about sort of like obviously the differences between Sega and Nintendo SNES, Super SNES. It's always a SNES. I don't care what other people say. And the Mega Drive. I think what there really is with it, it's like you don't get it these days. Well, I suppose you do with like your PlayStation exclusive games. They're all like big third person and massive adventures. But you had what I would say your Sega games, and they felt like Sega games, and your Nintendo games that felt like Nintendo games. And both systems were amazing, because I don't think Sonic's never worked as well on the Nintendo system, when they obviously we'll talk about what they did down the line, but Sonic on a Sega system is still something special.
Yes, it is, and it's that kind of coding to the metal kind of feeling of developing for a single platform, where nobody knows that technology better than the people who produce it, and they just tailor it to absolute perfection. And Sonic 2 definitely did that. Yeah.
The Dark Age of the Saturn.
So moving on from the 16 bits then.
Yep.
In the early 90s, Sega was trying to re-establish its foothold in the arcade market through a very expensive refresh of its technology. And to do that, it's subdivided into lots of different departments over the following years. The first being this amazing AM2, who led the innovation with the Model 1 board with Virtua Racing in 1992. They really hit their stride with the Model 2 board, though, which enabled a resurgent return to the top in the arcades. Daytona USA had all the looks, plus a bag of chips, and Virtua Fighter 2 made its predecessor, the first game, look prehistoric. And only this sort of similarly tech-obsessed Namco got anywhere near competing with Sega in the head-turning arcade cabinet department. It's fair to say that in the arcade, the hits just kept on coming, but in the home, the Spondulix just kept on leaving. In the early-ish 90s, Sega were hemorrhaging cash by mainly because of launching two costly failures in the forms of the 32X and the Mega CD. And then they rushed the Saturn to market with an awkward architecture, and it lent on 2D graphics processors. It had an expensive launch price, an underwhelming launch range, mediocre ports, limited third-party support, and the initial control was horrible. So all of these problems were fixed, or at least mitigated, within the first year or so. And the Saturn received some graphical showcases that were completely floored you. Stuff like, Sega Rally Championship, Panzer Dragoon, Virtua Fighter 2. But, it was doomed to failure because of the power and variety the PlayStation had.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there weren't some unique and exclusive games on the Saturn that made it amazing. And it was, home to the greatest ports of Capcom titles from the era, at the time when 2D fighting games ruled the arcades. So you had Darkstalkers, Vampire Savior, Street Fighter 03, Marvel Superheroes, all that Capcom brilliance. But you also had like Radiant Silvergun from Treasure and Guardian Heroes. And in the in-house stuff like Burning Rangers, Sonic R, and you had cave shooters like Dodonpachi and RPGs like Grandia. And it makes it, a truly forgotten gem of a system, and it's probably my favourite console of all time, I would say.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I had a on-off relationship with the Saturn. I managed to get one a few years after it was released. I don't know how I came across it, but I managed to get one. Not through nefarious means or anything. I think it was just given to me. And I think the only game I had was like Sega Worldwide Soccer on it.
Yeah.
And I went, this is not very good. And then I think I gave it away. But then a few years later, I picked it up again. Found it at a boot sale. It was the console, couple of controllers, and then a wallet with pretty much every Saturn game ever released in this game's wallet. All legit discs.
Yeah.
They had no cases, but legit discs. And I played through pretty much all of them, and ended up unfortunately having to sell it. But I've kind of rediscovered the Saturn later on, and had a great time with it. And there were some really, really good games on there. Yeah,
it's just amazing. It's got so much real brilliance, and I think that the thing that really makes the Saturn stand out is, there's a couple of things really. One, it didn't have a great deal of shovelware, which the PlayStation did, which doesn't detract from the PlayStation whatsoever. But yeah, the hit-to-miss ratio on the Saturn was really, really positive. It was, there were a lot of really great games and not that many really terrible ones, although the ones that were terrible were absolutely terrible. But the other thing is that it had games that were amazing exclusives, and that a lot of them have stayed exclusive, which is quite rare these days, especially as on the PlayStation, most of their big hits, if not all of them, became franchises that are still gigantic today.
Yeah.
But showcasing some of the stuff that Sega did on it, my top three are, at number 3, Panzer Dragoon Saga, which is the fantastic RPG made out of the Panzer Dragoon series, and is a really nice way of just using that franchise, its IP and its strange atmosphere and looks to create something really different. I'm actually playing a game at the moment that does something similar, but we'll talk about that next week. Number 2, Sega Rally Championship, just because it's pretty much a flawless port of the arcade. It obviously doesn't look as good, but apart from that, it handles just as well, and it still actually looks pretty damn good today, amazingly enough. And at number 1, Nights into Dreams, which is my favourite game of all time, and I've talked about on lots of occasions. It does something that no other game does. It's never been superseded, and it's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there's 3 solid titles there. I'm trying to think I don't think I played the RPG Panzer Dragoon. I want to say that I played Panzer Dragoon Zwei.
Yes, yeah.
Which was just the pure rail shooter, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one I played then. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because so my number 3 was Knights. Absolutely adored it, but I think I played more of the Christmas Nights demo than anything else.
Yeah.
Because that's just amazing. It's one of those things you don't get anymore. Just given away on a magazine.
I know.
it was but yeah, Knights is really, really good, and we showed it was lightning in the bottle because its original creator is still trying to find that spark again, and Balan Wonderworld was not that. But yeah, Knights shouldn't work. There's so much that you look at it and go, that doesn't work as a game mechanic, but just for whatever reason it does in Knights.
Yeah.
It is really special. Number 2, Sega Rally Championship. That was I think one of the first times I went, oh my God, it's an arcade game in my home.
Yeah.
Again, I dare say if you used to look at it now and play it on the hardware, you go, people go, right, it drops below 60 frames per second. Don't care, it played really well for me. I enjoyed the hell out of it. And number 1 is Panzer Dragoon Zwei.
Nice.
Because it was just, I don't really get on with rail shooters on the whole. I mean, I even struggle with Res to a degree, which for me is probably the spiritual successor to the Panzer Dragoon games. Someone will tell me that came out before them or whatever. I don't know. I don't care. But yeah, I had a great time with that. It was like flying dragons, but dragons that could shoot things. And yeah, it was just a wonderful, tight experience.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a game in that series that I haven't enjoyed. I really loved Panzer Dragoon Auto when it came out on the original Xbox.
Yeah.
But no, they're really good examples of that genre. And the RPG is just, it's great. It's one of those things where you do take something and go, the world of this is so unique and so interesting and so different that we need to make something completely different out of it so we can show a different side to it. And it's got that thing of you physically position yourself, a bit like Homeworld, you physically position yourself to attack weak spots rather than being in a static place and choosing which weak spot to attack like you do most in most RPGs. You physically move your dragon to different points around the creatures that you're attacking in 3D space.
Yeah.
And then that allows you to attack different parts of them. And it's really clever and the story's really excellent. Unfortunately, it barely got a UK release. It was in tiny numbers. It's really rare, and you can't play. It barely got released in the US either, so it's really rare there. There's tons of copies on Japanese Saturn, but of course you can't play those because they're in Japanese unless you're Japanese literate. So it's one of those that it's kind of almost forgotten to history, but is fabulous. So some just brilliant stuff on that machine. I just love it.
Yeah, no, again, I can't. I mean, I wish I'd appreciated it more in its day. But I think that actually, I'm assuming the Sega console we'll come to next is another one that follows that line of it's not as appreciated as it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally is. So,
the dream is cast asunder.
Yeah, I mean, hubris may have accounted for many of Sega's woes when it came to the Saturn, but it was still pumping out great arcade content, even though the market was, by this time, it was really starting to shrink. The era of home ports looking identical or near as damn it to their arcade, forebears and progenitors was upon us, and Sega didn't rest on their laurels. So shifting from the Model 3 board, which was home to hits like, Daytona USA 2, Virtua Fighter 3, House of the Dead, over to their new Naomi platform, they seem to be setting themselves up for success. And their vision was, much like we were talking about, the gamer to find a fancy new title in the arcade and then buy the exact same thing for their home console with all the same bells and whistles. And it was a beautiful dream, and it birthed the aptly named Dreamcast. But to the distress and disappointment of many, including us too, it failed to find a foothold and languished while, again, Sony's machine, the PS2, soared. Sega correctly pivoted away from obscure hardware to something, small, bright, shiny, easy to program for. But it failed to convince punters its games were anything more than sort of tapas next to Sony's all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet. Lasting a mere 2 years before being discontinued, it was a costly flop that drove Sega out of the hardware business and began their decline from pioneers to the company that we know today. But still, enough negative has been said about the wonder box that is the Dreamcast, which is Brad's favourite console of all time, and it's one of mine.
Yes.
So let's talk nice stuff and what a heap of nice stuff there is to say. So not only do you get the superlative and funky fresh titles like Jet Set Radio, Samba de Amigo, Sonic Adventure, the mascot who sat out an entire generation pretty much, but Naomi ports like Virtua Tennis, Get Bass, Sega Rally 2, House of the Dead 2, loads more, and the Capcom exclusives like Power Stone, Resident Evil Code Veronica, at least for a time, Skies of Arcadia, quirky stuff like Cool Cool Toon, Cosmic Smash by Sega Rosso, and then, there were some massive
Typing of the Dead.
Typing of the Dead, yeah.
Because you could use a keyboard.
I know. It was crazy. And, it had so many games that have left massive footprints in game design. Shenmue, Rez, Ikaruga, Metropolis Street Racer, which became Project Gotham. It's arguably the console of all of them with the most positive hit to miss ratio in history. I think I would go out on a limb, and it's a hill I would die on to say that. I think my second place pick would probably be the Neo Geo, which again has hardly any crappy shovelware, and it was a progenitor of series that are still huge to this day. I mean, often because the PS2 snaffled up the rights when Sega started hitting the skids, but regardless. And you can't end the chat without, mentioning that it's the first major console with internet-enabled gameplay, with Quake 3 and Phantasy Star Online in particular, it's showcasing these amazing online experiences. So, a lot of Sega's mortal injuries were self-inflicted, but the Dreamcast certainly wasn't one of them. It was a beautiful idea whose core principles are still alive today. They came through from the Xbox and then filtered through into the rest of gaming and changed the way that it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's something we look at with Sega. Maybe we'll cover this a bit more once we've done our top 3 games, because I think there's a lot more chat to have over that side of it. But you mentioned it's not a Sega game, but Quake 3 on the Dreamcast. I think I've waxed lyrical over that. I'm sorry, that shouldn't be possible on what was a dial-up connection.
I know.
I don't know what magic they worked. And again, I dare say if I was to go back, set it all up as it was now, I'd go, oh my God, this chugs a lot or whatever. But at the time, oh my God, it was like, this is the future. And in the end, it was the future.
Yeah.
Just no one was ready for it. It honestly, it reminds me of that scene at the end of Back to the Future where he goes, maybe you're not ready for it, but your kids are going to love it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, that's what the Sega Dreamcast was.
They were so far ahead of their time, weren't they? It's just,
yeah,
on that front, Sony were playing catch up. And
they were giving away games. They was Game Pass before Game Pass existed. Choo Choo Rocket, It's...
Yeah. Oh yeah, they did so many things that are just the way it's done now. And
charity game as well. There was a toy box, like a toy car racing type game that was a £5 because money went to charity, and it was just just loads of little things like that.
Yes, yeah, and its demise is terribly, terribly sad. And it's no surprise and no shock that the PS2 is still the most sold console in history, which, you say that and people would think, well, is it not like the Game Boy or one of the versions of it, or the Wii, which was like a cultural phenomenon? No, it's still the PS2. It sold, if memory serves, 192 million units, which is significantly more still than the Wii. Which I think is still second. And, you had no hope whatsoever when you were going up against that. And
No.
part of it, quite a lot of it was Sega's own fault, because they could have carved out a niche in the same way that the Xbox did when that came to the table. But I think it needed that kind of killer app much earlier on to have sold even double what it did.
Yeah.
Which still wouldn't have made it that big a success. But none of this takes away from it being an incredible machine.
No, I think that's the struggle, because this is the one I found hardest to put a top 3 together for, because there were so many good games. I had to go, oh my god, that wasn't actually Sega, that was so and so put this on this, because it was literally the home arcade. It was the dream realised in the end. And I go through it and I'm going, there's barely a dud amongst it. You can't blame Sega for not going, right, we're only going to have the best games on here. Some have aged poorly, don't get me wrong, but that happens with absolutely anything. But they just went, right, no, if we're going to have a game on here, it's going to be an absolute banger, and that's what you had. So you can't blame that. You can't blame piracy either, because I know it was an easy one to do piracy for. Yeah. But the Nintendo DS was the easiest thing to ever pirate on. I think even sort of like your nan had a R4 card. Yeah. Loaded up with games. So it's not piracy that killed it, because the DS was a massive success. And so I honestly think it was just the momentum of Sony at the time killed it. I honestly don't know what... If I was Sega then and I knew what I knew now, I honestly don't know what I would have done differently. Apart from going, let's have all the shovelware, which I don't want. I don't know what I could have done. I just don't think it could have succeeded, no matter what it did.
I agree. I think they could have done, Sega themselves could have done loads of things different and spent less and still, like I say, doubled sales. But it only sold 19 million units, which is very, very small, in this market. Yeah. And it's funny because they also, I was looking, I learned this when I was looking through the stats when I was putting this together, and you got, I think the Mega Drive sold about 12 or 15 million units against the SNES's 30 million, and that was the size of the market back then. And it was the PlayStation 1 that, with its cheap media format, that made buying consoles a much bigger thing and enabling there to be hundreds of millions of sales. And I think that even if if the Dreamcast had been able to tap into that thing and sold 50 million units, the PS2 would still outsold it 3 or 4 units to 1, which would not have been enough for them, especially with the R&D they put into the Dreamcast. I think I would have, if you're thinking about just having some success, I suppose you could have had the modem as an add-on rather than an in-box product. But even then, that was part of its USP. So I think more like making the controller better, having twin sticks.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one, because it really does hold it back. It holds it back functionally, and physically it's an unpleasant controller to use.
Yes.
And the VMUs being what they are and expensive, I applaud them for the technology, but it's unnecessary. And I would have had just ordinary memory cards.
None of the little mini games you got for it were good enough to carry the VMU, unfortunately.
No. It's one of those things that it's it's a nice thing to have, but they could have.
But eventually, it became the Switch. So at the same time, it was innovative.
It was. But if they'd done it so you could buy a VMU if you wanted one, that would have been good enough.
Yeah.
And then you could just...
Or just a plain memory card.
Bargo memory card. Yeah, absolutely. And also, the GD-ROM side of things to try and make it, more hack-proof, which didn't work and just made it more expensive for them to produce the games. Lots and lots of little things that, in retrospect...
it was easier than sticking a bit of blue tack in a PlayStation, so,
I know. It was crazy. But... yes, those things aside, amazing games, and I would love to hear your top 3.
I'm going to come to that in a minute, actually, so I'm going to carry this on a little bit, because I've got a theory as to why when you look at how video games have aged from when they did and then sort of like the way they was accepted and where they are now, and why the Dreamcast had to fail, in my opinion, is around the time of the Dreamcast coming out, is around the time many early adopters of video games were hitting their 20s and going out and getting their jobs. And I reckon they could have afforded one console only. Because, you still maybe got mortgage for a lot of people, starting families, so you can afford one console, but you can afford that console. And the marketing behind the PlayStation 2 and the momentum from the PlayStation 1 was massive at the time. And what you had with the PlayStation 1, I think, is a mixture of parents who had maybe played some of their kids' other, like the SNES, the Mega Drive and stuff like that, which is why these numbers are getting bigger as well. But they'd played those and gone, I'd quite like to play this game on this, and this is the one I've heard of, so we'll get a PlayStation over a Saturn or an N64. But by the time the PlayStation 2 came out, the kids were now adults and able to start buying, but just didn't have the income to afford two really expensive consoles.
Yes, yeah.
But now, we've got to a point where I think if you used to release a Sega Dreamcast now at a good price, like a Nintendo-based price, I actually think it'd sell really, really, really well if it carried on and kept what it did for the original, which is, look, here's Sega games, a couple of extras, but here are Sega games, have at it. Or if it just became a History of Sega machine or something like that, where it was like from Dreamcast all the way down, played natively on a Dreamcast 2 or something. I think it's a succeed because people will go, actually, I've got my Xbox or my PlayStation, because you can get pretty much every game on either of those. I wouldn't mind a Sega Blue Skies machine or something like that alongside it, but I honestly think it was just a case of one time because of the audience at the age they were at the time.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that's a really good observation that, that we were the generation, and people people a little bit older than us, but Generation X definitely were the first generation who grew up with games emerging and into the home in 79, 80 sort of thing, and therefore the very first thing you wanted to do when you were 18 or whatever and earning your living wage was to buy a console. And if you're going to buy one, you were going to buy the one that played the Matrix, DVD, which we all remember fondly. It was.
Hey, I watched American Pie on a GD-ROM on a Dreamcast.
Hey, I think you're probably the only one.
It was a cam copy as well. It was awful.
Oh, lovely.
I was around a friend's house, and we watched American Pie. You needed two GD-ROMs, and it cut off halfway through, and you had to swap it. Oh dear.
Yeah. It was. I mean, it's just the Dreamcast versus PS2 alone. You could write a history book on.
Oh yeah, definitely. And as I said, doing a top three for this was so difficult that I'm going to do a top three. I'll get you to do your top three after, and then I just want to mention what others I've got on my list here, just because they deserve a mention. But my top three is Ferrari F355 Challenge. I learned the Suzuka circuit on that, and it was amazing. I know that circuit inside out because of that game. And again, maybe it's a Ferrari thing, I don't know. Absolutely amazing. Number 2 is Jet Set Radio.
Yes.
Blew me away at the time. Whenever anyone talks about cel-shaded graphics to me, that's the one that springs to mind.
Yeah.
And it played so well at the time. It still holds up. Visually, it still holds up. Gameplay-wise, it could do with a couple of quality of life updates, I'm not going to lie. But at the time, wow, what a game that was. And at number 1, this was a difficult choice. But Daytona USA. Oh, how good was that on the Dreamcast?
It was.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, they're just fabulous. Yeah, I totally agree on Jet Set Radio. It was just one of the things that is great about particularly the Dreamcast is when you emulate it. Now, like, playing it now is still great, but when you emulate it, it hasn't aged in the same way that PS2 visuals have.
No.
And it's because it's very clean, very solid, very often 60 frames per second. In fact, I think almost exclusively, apart from the odd title. And, it didn't have texture warping, it didn't have glitching, it didn't have breaking up. So if you just stick it in an emulator and you put the resolution high, it looks like games from today. And many of them still play like games from today. And Jet Set Radio doesn't, like you say, it needs quality of life improvements. But if you get over the hump of the awkward and slightly crappy controls, it's just an amazing thing they were doing 20 odd years ago, definitely.
Okay, but I mean, go do your top three, and then I've got. I mean, more than honourable mention. These are knighthood mentions. We'll call it. Keep sticking with the Mole family thing. Go on, what's your top three?
Well, yeah, it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult. I agree with you, and I'm going to put more in, but definitely Res at number 3. Not even so much because I'm a massive fan, although I am a fan of it, but just because it's a technical marvel and innovative in all sorts of ways. And I was genuinely furious when it came out on the PS2. I was really, really angry. I know that's pathetic. Yeah, I fanboyed over that one really hard. I was very angry about it.
It's a Sega game.
I know. But you were already seeing the Dreamcast starting to struggle, and to see it get that release on the PS2 was a real blow to the heart, But anyway, at number 2, Jet Set Radio, same as you, and at number 1, Phantasy Star Online, which for me is just in that way, in the way that it plays and the innovation and the way that you can communicate with people and the sort of simple arcade gameplay somehow translating into a MMORPG.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, and not something that's really done very much today. Certainly not any of the bigger companies. They just make it very, very complex. But just a fantastic game way before its time.
Yeah, it's the only MMO I've played that I've actually played. I've dipped my toe in, tried World of Warcraft and stuff like that, and Final Fantasy 14, and gone, what? No. I don't, what? Who? How? What's going on here? But Phantasy Star Online, it was simple but still so in depth. I used to love jumping on, finding people. I don't think I played with friends on it, but I'd find random people, would go off on missions, and they were easy to understand because it was Sega. So they knew it had to be playable. People had to enjoy it, and that's the theme that runs throughout Sega's games. It had to be enjoyable first and foremost.
Yeah.
And that's what this was.
Yeah, I think that was very possibly a byproduct of them being... not just being arcadey, because that's an obvious observation, being an arcade company first and foremost. I think it was because they split up into so many different divisions. Like, the guys that did Panzer Dragoon Saga were AM6, and they went through all sorts of different names. They were called Team Andromeda, they were later called Smilebit, but there were all sorts of other ones. It was AM3 became Sega Rosso. But anyway,
something like that.
All of them were arcade producers first and foremost, and whatever they turned their minds to, they would not let it escape from them and become something that wasn't, at least at its core, simple and accessible and fun. And they never lost sight of that certainly not with their big releases on the Dreamcast.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, I'm just going to rattle off some names that I've got here in my growing Dreamcast collection. So Choo Choo Rocket is fantastic. The fact it was given away for free just still blows my mind.
Yes.
We see it now. I mean, I say blows my mind. Well, obviously we're seeing sort of like huge games given away for free these days. But back then, again, it was like, this is better than many other games I've ever played, so thank you. Crazy Taxi, I mean, oh my god, how good was Crazy Taxi? It still holds up today, but people have tried to imitate it and you can't. Obviously you need to play the original Crazy Taxis with like Pizza Hut, KFC, Blockbusters and The Offspring in it. You can't play the other version. Say Daytona Dead or Alive 2, I thought was a really, really good port as well. Really enjoyed that. Hydro Thunder, there's no... It's a shame that Hydro Thunder Hurricane, the remake, didn't succeed, because Hydro Thunder was brilliant and Hurricane was a really good sort of like reimagining of it. But again, I know these aren't all Sega games, but I don't care. I'm breaking the rules for the Dreamcast because the Dreamcast broke all the rules as well. Ikaruga, one of the only vertical shooters I properly played.
Yeah.
Absolutely outstanding. I'm going through alphabetical because my list is alphabetical, by the way. Metropolis Street Racer. Again, blew my mind as a racer. There was you could probably find technically better racers, but it had a day-night cycle and a proper thing. So if you played Tokyo during the day in the UK, it was night. But if you played at night, Tokyo was in the day, and it was just amazing that was a thing they'd done. It had these live radio stations and everything. Yeah. It was so innovative and it looked amazing. Sonic Adventure games, again, probably like Jet Set Radio, don't quite hold up today in terms of how they play. But again, they were first for me. And whereas Mario 64, for example, was brilliant, but it was slow paced, it was methodical, and Sonic was always to go, oh, look how slow Mario is, look how much faster we can be. The opening levels of the Sonic Adventure games did that. Just don't play beyond the opening levels of either of the games because they start to fall apart. But again, they were amazing. And Soul Calibur was amazing.
Oh, yes.
What a pulp that was. And Wetrix as well. I thought that was a really good game because I've got to get a puzzle game in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But Wetrix has done it. And Samba de Amigo, I'm sure you've got others as well. They still brought those arcade machines in a way with Samba de Amigo into the home with the peripherals. Sega Bass with the peripheral as well. But they weren't just cheap plastic tat either. They felt something. They felt real. Not real, obviously, but they felt a connect to the game. Not like the Wii with plastic tat you put things in. It had a connection to the game. And that Sega Bass rod, it had a sort of feedback to it. You felt as though you was actually reeling in a fish with it. And it's just, oh my God, Sega was so innovative.
I know, they really were. They really were. My mate bought one from an import shop for about 600 quid, which in today's money is probably around $1,000. And I went round to his house special to see it, and I was completely blown away by it. And not just because of the graphics, but a lot because he bought, because he was just money mad. I just didn't care how much he spent, and he got the control. He had Sonic Adventure, he had Get Bass with the fishing controller, and he had, I want to say that he had Street Fighter 03, or was that not out then? But he had the joystick as well. So he'd spent some cash, and
I bet you like him.
Oh yeah, still do, because he still does the same sort of stuff.
I'm coming round.
Yeah, just gonna pot around.
Oh
play.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
So just absolutely amazing. I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing, and like you, just to add a couple more really important titles, House of the Dead 2 with the light gun.
Yeah,
that's just fantastic. It was a really good light gun as well. I really enjoyed it. I kind of liked Resident Evil Code Veronica a little bit. It wasn't amazing, but it was nice to see them pushing the boundaries with that. Power Stone I was a big fan of. Really loved Power Stone.
The pre-Smash Brothers.
That's right. Yeah, again, you've seen the DNA of stuff. It was very simple. It was all about the environment and what you did with it, and just really, really great. And so it was a phenomenal machine. Ikaruga, you can't really talk about it without that. And so many
Sega Rally 2. No one's mentioned Sega Rally 2 yet.
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was a bit of a disappointment at the time, but in retrospect, I think it was actually a pretty good game. Yeah.
It's the Dreamcast. If I could own one console again with full library, it would be the Dreamcast.
Yeah,
I've got fond memories of so many different consoles. Many of them I came too late. This one, I saved my money for ages to get one. And someone said to me, I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, you backed the Ron Horse once," and I still don't think I did, because I had so many hours and days and years of enjoyment from it, and I'm still getting enjoyment from Dreamcast games. Sure, I'm having to emulate them now, but I'm still getting that enjoyment from them. that I tried going back to a couple of old favourites on the PS1 and the PS2, and I'm playing them now going, yeah, I can see why I liked them at the time.
Yeah. Well, I've got my Regulation 7 Dreamcast, which I managed to get cheap from Japan, but comparatively cheap, which is a beautiful machine, and it's got the an optical disc emulator in there, basically loads and loads of games. And I've got those Atomic Wave games I was talking about, like Dolphin Blue, and it's just great. It's Border Down, I mean, we could talk about it for absolutely ages. Yeah.
I mean, what company? I mean, what drugs were they on at the time? Coming up with semen. And the fact they bought a microphone adapter out for it. And it's just like, yeah, if you're going to pump money into that sort of thing, I can almost see why you struggle to make money. Yeah. But at the same time, bless you.
I know.
For doing that.
Insane. Brilliant, but insane.
Yeah, and again, you then look in the DS, the GameCube and stuff like that. Nintendo tried all this stuff afterwards to varying degrees of success. Again, the DNA of Sega is in so much stuff we have today.
It really is, yeah. Just stuff like what did they like? There was like Odama, which was that weird kind of RTS/pinball game on the GameCube that had the kind of microphone thing, and all sorts of stuff. That those ideas started filtering through into the next generation of consoles. So massive influence.
Yeah, and the 2K Sports series as well. I mean, again, sports games never hold up on the whole. But I tried a couple of NBA. It was one of the 2K Sports, and like the football one, like the American football one they had, and they still play okay. They're not great, but they were great at the time, and they still play okay. And that's the thing. I don't think I've played a Sega game, like a Dreamcast game, where I've gone, oh my god, this is absolutely dreadful. Even was it Headhunter?
Yeah.
It was okay, It was okay at the time, and it's still okay now. But that's the thing. I don't think I went, oh my god, that is the worst thing I've ever played. There was no. Again, you mentioned there was no shovelware on the Dreamcast, so you're not accidentally. Your name's not going to go and buy you a Phoenix Games title on the Dreamcast. You're only going to get something that's playable. Maybe not good, maybe not great, but at least competent and okay. Pound for pound, the best console ever released.
Yeah, it's hard to say that it isn't, really. I mean, I'd say that the SNES comes close in terms of hit, as I said before. Super Nintendo, that comes close in terms of hit to miss, but there was still a lot of garbage on that. But it's just amazing. It's just an amazing console. There is a great argument for it being the best single console of all time in terms of the amount of quality versus the amount of rubbish on it. Yeah.
So what would you say then is the continuation of Sega's consoles? Is it the Xbox?
That's a really good question. I think that it's the only one that's close. I think they've moved away from it a bit now. I think in the 360 era they were very much taking up the mantle.
Yeah.
I think there was an opportunity for them to have merged with Sega around sort of 2000, 2004, 2005, maybe up until even 2010, where that would have saved Sega and, all of their stuff would have come out. But 2005 me would have been railing at that and saying, God, no, they've got to stay independent, they'll lose their identity, blah, blah, blah. But, Sega pretty much have lost their identity, and the only, sort of publisher/developer that is anything like that, I think is Xbox. Nintendo's still Nintendo. Sony still want to have everything on there if they can. They have very, very westernized studios, whereas Sega have always been a very, very Eastern-focused studio. So,
Sony have become very safe, haven't they, with what they do, which is, I mean, it's good to see them branching out to PC, but they become very safe. And Sega and even Microsoft take risks, even if they fail, because the Kinect, I mean, why? That's, don't do that again. Never do that again. But they took the risk and it failed. But they took risks with online play, proper online play. They took a risk with Game Pass and stuff like that. Again, calculated risks. And that's what Sega did. They took risks. Yeah. And it's strange that if you could say Sega now, most people assume, Sonic and Mario, it's a Nintendo thing. But for me, yeah, it's Xbox. But Sega was a publisher. Tell me another publisher that would regularly put out the Yakuza series.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
because that failed in the West essentially, and then somehow came back.
Yeah,
and people are loving the original games all over again. I first played Yakuza and went, "Oh, why are they not making more Shenmue?"
Yeah,
and then I played more Yakuza and went, "Oh, that's why they're not bothering with Shenmue."
Yeah.
But Binary Domain, Vanquish, all these Sega published games, it's like you take risks. They're still doing it. The Sonic people look at Sega and go, "Oh, the Sonic games are crap." Stop looking at Sega as Sonic. Sonic as a mascot is amazing, and he's done wonders for Sega. And he still has bangers. The Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed is one of the best kart races out there. I prefer it to many of the Mario karts, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
And, you know, say Yakuza's good. I think the Sonic Mania, when they finally listen to what needs to be done, is brilliant. But, you know, they've tried to shoehorn Sonic into other things and it's not worked really well. Sonic 4 was an absolute abomination. But Sega, with their other properties, have just done so many good things. You know, when they brought back Daytona to on the Xbox 360 arcade, my God, that was a great port. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And it was... They can still do it. And I think a lot of people forget just how good Sega actually are with what they're producing these days. And they've gone into their publish. They went through a bit of a rocky stage, but as a publisher, I actually think they're one of the better ones out there.
Yeah, well, you've actually just stole a load of my content, which is fine, because at least it means we're on the same page.
Plagiarism is the best.
Post-hardware blues.
But yeah, no, that is absolutely right. And, you know, following the Dreamcast, they were embattled and they were losing cash at a scary rate. And they did the one thing their fans didn't want, but at least, you know, ensured their continuation. They dropped hardware development and became a publisher-developer who was platform agnostic. Luckily for them, it was just in time for the Xbox and GameCube to ramp up, with Sega leading the charge on those systems with the likes of Jet Set Radio Future, Panzer Dragoon Auto that I mentioned before, Super Monkey Ball, Billy Hatcher, and more of those. And they teamed up a little bit with fellow On the Outs arcade developers like Sammy to produce SNK properties on the Atomis Wave hardware. But by this point, you know, coin-ops were rapidly becoming an obscure and forgotten cul-de-sac of design. But thankfully, you know, a lot of the DNA of the best Sega divisions, like we were saying, remains. And it still produces the odd hit. So the Yakuza series is created by Amusement Vision. They're now called Ryuga Gotoku Studio, probably saying that completely wrong, but, you know, they are Amusement Vision, who were an AM studio originally. They also did Binary Domain, and they're doing, you know, Super Monkey Ball, Banana Blitz. And Sonic Team are still pumping out Sonic games, although it's a bit of a Flying Dutchman without Yuji Naka at the helm of the Sonic Team. But they occasionally stumble on the right formula with, you know, Sonic Colors, Generations, Sonic Mania. They're all solid Sonic releases. The maestro of the Super Scrollers and the outrunner himself, Yu Suzuki, managed to get Shenmue 3 kickstarted, and yeah, so he still exists. And Sonic's creator, obviously Naka-san, released the maligned Balan Wonderworld this year, although most wish he hadn't. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are two very bright spots. AM2, which is probably Sega's best ever studio, Fight Me, they still break cover from time to time. They're responsible for that Hitsune Miku series of games, and for the Border Break series in Japan, which is really big.
Yep.
And Virtua Fighter 5, which just had a resurgence on PlayStation. And they're thriving as publishers. Like Wikipedia tells me that Metacritic ranked them as the best publisher of the year in 2020, with 28 of its releases getting 90%, 95% actually.
Yeah.
Including two with great scores for Persona 5 Royal and Yakuza 0. And they've also, like I say, published Platinum Games titles. They've published Alien Isolation, Puyo Puyo Tetris. So, you know, they may no longer be the purveyors of the splash waves and the trademark blue skies, but they'll always have a place in our hearts.
Yeah, definitely. The future for Sega then. What do they do? Because do they release... maybe not in the next couple of years, maybe we're looking at 5-10 years down the line, they've got to release a Dreamcast Mini. It's just, I can't see them not doing it because there's so much on there. They put their entire self-published, self-developed games library on there because they hopefully still got all the rights to those. That would sell gangbusters, I reckon.
Yeah.
Because you'll get the people who loved it will go, yeah, I'm having that. And the people who maybe went, let's see what this Dreamcast is all about, will give it a go as well. And it's just, I want them to continue publishing. I don't want them to go, we're going exclusive consoles again, because I think that ship's passed. I don't want exclusivity. I want to be able to play everything on everything, including Nintendo games. If you've got stuff for specific hardware, great, but I want to be able to play everything on everything. But they've got, probably, along with Nintendo, they've got the richest past. I'd love to see them do a box that just says, look, here's our past up to 2000 and X, for example, whatever it is. Here it all is, one system, off you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only holdback from that is that a lot of its experiences, it's twofold. A lot of their experiences that made them special needed the extra controllers. So if they did a Dreamcast Mini, I think if they didn't bring out like a mini fishing rod controller, they'd be missing out. But they could do that.
The fishing rod controller would be bigger than the console, though, obviously.
Yeah. And also, the light gun and the arcade stick, which brings me to the second reason it might not be on their cards, is the pad, which, absolutely awful. And I don't know if people are going to want to re-engage with that pad. They might have to redesign it, and then people will moan that it's not authentic. And I think none of these things will stop it happening, but I think they're probably the things that are slowing it down a little bit.
Do both a redesigned pad and the original pad. Microsoft brought back the Duke.
Yeah, it's true.
Just because for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
So go, look, here's a redesigned Dreamcast pad, so it just makes the games nicer to play and easier to hold. But tell you what, we also do an edition with the original pad. There's so much they could do. I'd buy peripherals for it if they done it. Release it maybe initially, because we're internet connected, so there's no reason they can't add games to it and stuff like that as well. And people will hack it so you can put ROMs on it and everything anyway, so there's that. But just go, look, here's an initial pack with, you only need the controller to play these games. We're actually then going to release Evercade style. Every couple of months or every few months, we're going to release here's Sega Bass Fishing with the controller. It's available for a limited time. It might not be the best business practice, but this is Sega, and if they wasn't taking a risk with a system they was trying to make, I'd be worried. Yeah.
I think, also because they're not a hardware producer anymore, there would have to be will at the top for getting the companies involved who can actually produce the stuff, and they don't have those connections, and it's a shame. But I think you're right. I think we'll see it. I really hope we do. It really deserves to have that place in console history and find a new audience. But
don't forget again, sorry, just with the mini consoles, Sega, when they brought out their Mega Drive Mini, they didn't just bring out a Mega Drive Mini. No, that wasn't good enough for Sega. They actually allowed you to buy all the little add-ons to create a Tower of Power. That didn't work. It didn't work, but you could buy all the add-ons to create a Tower of Power. They know. They're so aware still. That's the thing. They don't feel like old men in suits making decisions, because Sony would never have done a Tower of Power style thing. Nintendo would never have done a Tower of Power style thing or anything like that. You can't buy an N64 Mini with a double D attachment or anything like that. Sega went, go on Tower of Power. It might not work. It's just little plastic bits to add on, but there you go. Because it's Sega.
Yeah. Well, Sega are always sort of a little bit like the Beatles, They kind of, they were all brilliant. They were brilliant together, but then they kind of they all got to a point where they just wanted to split up and do all of their stuff separately and be their own men. Whereas, Nintendo are much more like the Rolling Stones, where, they never allowed to break away. They always stayed together. They're still touring now, kind of thing. And they kind of had that, we'll split up and we'll have our genius alone, and it never really worked out for them. But I'd love to see a mini console. But I'm making you now answer my next question, which is a much more difficult one, because it's, what are your top 5 post-console releases by Sega. So since they've stopped producing hardware in the period sort of 2003 whatever till now, only 20 years to cover, what are your favourite games of theirs? So I'll do mine first, if you like.
Yep.
I'll go through them quick and we can talk about them in a bit. So at 5, I've got Phantasy Star Online 2 on the PC. At 4, Sonic Colors on the Wii. At 3, 3D Outrun. I don't know why I said it like that. 3D Outrun on the 3DS. At 2, Afterburner Climax from the arcade. And at number 1, Outrun 2 from the arcade.
Oh yeah, that's a good selection. I've gone slightly different with this. So Super Monkey Ball.
Yeah.
Absolute banger. Yakuza Like a Dragon.
Yeah.
That's such a good game. And Puyo Puyo Tetris 2.
Good shout.
That encompasses both 2 and Puyo Puyo Tetris. I kind of, again, my Tetris rules. It all kind of gets bundled into one.
Yep.
What have I done? Is that 3?
Yep, that's 3.
So far? That's 3. Oh. Now, do I go? It's either Vanquish or Binary Domain. No, I'm going to put both those honourable mentions because number 2 is going to be OutRun Coast to Coast on the PSP.
Yeah.
Bugger me, that was a hell of a game.
Yep.
And number 1, Sonic Mania. Why not put Sonic back at the top? Because, oh my god, Sonic Mania is everything Sonic 4 should have been. And the fact is, it's recognised as probably the actual Sonic 4. And they've retconned the Sonic 4 games for Sonic Mania. Yeah, it's absolutely outstanding. And again, it takes anything that needed quality of life with the original Sonic games, put it into Sonic Mania, but made the game you remember, not the games as they were. Beautiful.
Awesome. I mean, Vanquish is a good shout. I know that Platinum was sort of a first-party company for Sega around that time, but I still think of them as Platinum, But yeah, no, it's a great shout. I love that game so much. It's really good. It does that Doom 2016 thing of you're not allowed to have cover. It's not really allowing you to. You can do it, but it's really about pressing forward, and the more aggressive you are, the more successful you are. And there are very few games that really do that. And yeah, Doom being one of them. But yeah, Vanquish, lovely game. And it's like playing a 1990s anime kind of thing. Absolutely great game.
And again, we can add this. Okay, just going through the list, and going, I could have put that in there. I could have put this in there. So, you got the Sonic Racing games, absolutely amazing. The other Yakuza games, obviously outstanding. They've done obviously spin-offs to Super Monkey Ball. Some of them are good. Catherine as well. What a game that is! The Football Manager series they own. The various Persona games they do. They put out a free version of Puyo Puyo. In the hope of making that work. Again, they're quite happy to take those risks.
Yeah.
Shenmue 1, 2 and 3, you've got to give them some credit for those because, again, they might not hold up, but they are important titles in the history of video games for various different reasons. Yeah. The idea of a game within Shenmue going to the actual arcades, amazing. The 2 Point games and anything like their strategy style games, again, they're best in class, those games that they've made. Shin Megami Tensei as well, amazing games. I can't remember if I said Football Manager, but they've got that. There's just so much there. And you know what? There is some tat in there. There's been a couple of poor Crazy Taxi spin-offs, some poor Sonic games, some lazy mobile cash grabs. But again, can I have a go at Sega for that, knowing others have done it? Not really, because others have done it. So why, I'm not going to go to Sega, you shouldn't do that. I mean, I'd rather they didn't, but they've tried it, it's not worked. And again, they took risks. They've done their own remake of Bayonetta.
Yeah.
Again, all I can say is it's Sega.
Yep, absolutely amazing. And I think, for my list, Phantasy Star Online 2 took too long to get off PC and into the console space, which ruined it for people, but it's still great. I think Sonic Colors is, for me, I like it a lot more than Sonic Mania, but Sonic Mania is a cracking game as well. But I love Sonic Colors. I think it's really underrated. I was really glad that it got a remaster for stuff off the Wii, and 3D OutRun is just amazing. It's the first time, amazingly, that OutRun's in 60 frames per second, and the 3D effect just works. And they added loads of quality of life improvements, and it's handheld. It's one of the best conversions of a game that's ever been made for me. And the top two are the strange time when Sega decided to use this Limburg arcade hardware and revive their franchises, and it only lasted a really short time. But in that time, Afterburner Climax is amazing. It's a bit like Pac-Man Championship Edition. It adds without taking away, but just everything it adds is absolutely incredible. And it's just an amazing arcade game. And and OutRun 2, you have to argue, is it better than the original game? Even though the original is an untouchable classic. It's one of those, There's not an answer to that, but the fact is, it's one of the best arcade games ever made. And you can never get bored of OutRun 2. Every time I get a new PC, or, I just feel like it, I stick my copy of it on PC on, and it just looks fabulous, and it's just fun to play. Timeless.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, as you're talking, I'm listening to you as well. I'm still also going through sort of like a list of all Sega published games. And, oh, my God, there's just so many. And I'm not looking at any of them. There is the odd dud. Like, there's a couple of really poor Monkey Ball games and stuff like that. And then you see some of the Japanese-only stuff and go, oh, why did they bring that out over here?
Yeah.
So it's like some Japanese soccer games and stuff like that. You go, well, we could do some more football games over here that are not FIFA or Pro Evo, so do that. The Hatsune Miku games, for example, they're not for me. I can't, but I've played a couple of them just because, and even though they're not for me, my God, they are tightly made, well, controlled games. Yeah. They've absolutely nailed it. It's that they've taken what was Space Channel 5 and gone, this is better.
Yeah, I know. The depth and level of quality is massive. And to answer your question about where they go in future, I think a mini console would be good for them. I might, especially if they did it as a leading the charge into going back into hardware. Although I don't know if I can ever see them doing that. But what I would like them to do is to go back to their old IP and really give it a real big jog. So I think the best way they could do it would be similar to what they did with in 2003 2004 when they released OutRun 2 and Afterburner Climax. Revisit these games and do a Pac-Man CE on them, and keep the originals, the best bits of the original stuff in them, but add new quality of life improvements. Don't look at making them AAA. Make them comparatively cheaper, do a bunch of them at once so all the nostalgia hits, and then release them. And I would like to see them do that in the way that they did it for the 3DS. So give us, Super Hang-On, OutRun, Thunderblade, Afterburner, maybe a couple more, all at the same time, all at a reasonable price, or adding stuff like Pac-Man CE did. And I think that they would reinvigorate that excitement. I think now and again putting out a conversion of Wonder Boy 3 or, the Alex Kidd upgrade type remake thing, it's not enough. I think you have to do a big push on your big titles and, use that as a platform.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, the way I would describe Sega, they're not a AAA developer because, touch wood, at the moment, they've not gone down the route of how can we just get all the money in the world. For me, they're a major publisher, but with an indie heart still. That's how they feel to me. They want, their whole ethos is, we want you to buy our games, we want your money, but we're going to do that by giving you fun games. The total opposite of like Square Enix and stuff like that at the moment. I mean, I'm just looking at their upcoming slate of announced stuff. So you've got Sonic Frontiers, obviously, which everyone's dubbing Sonic of the Wild. I can't wait to see. It's either going to be the biggest failure you ever can imagine, or it's going to be something spectacular. More Company of Heroes, 2 Point Campus, really looking forward to that, by the way, from Sega. That's the 2 Point games are really good. It's good to see them rather than just rehashing the hospital again. They're doing something different with the engine. They've got an Origins collection of Sonic stuff. That I wonder if they might do any CE Championship Edition style stuff with that. That'd be quite interesting if they do. So you've got, there's not much they've got on the announcements. I'm waiting for some big announcements from them. They've got like 4 titles coming next year. Or this year now, as it is. And I want to see what they've got in the locker, because they produce so many games that they can't just be having 4 for 2022. So take a risk, Sega.
Yeah.
Take a risk.
They were always the risk-taking experimental company, that sometimes, very often, completely to their own detriment. But yes, we don't want that to go away. There's not enough of it these days. So, yeah.
So I've got one bit of a left field question for you.
Ooh, go on.
Right, obviously, we've had all the Sega consoles over the years. What for you is the one title that you consider a Sega game that's not actually made or published by Sega?
Oh.
That you associate with a Sega console over everything else?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, I think Psycho Fox is a good shout.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was built in the image of Sega platform games. Maybe not that well known these days, but yeah, I think that's a Sega. That feels like a Sega title to me. I also think the only company who felt like them were Atari in their kind of heyday, and I would say, if not for the violence, I think stuff like Narc felt kind of Sega-ish.
Yeah.
Today, in today's world, I think there's a lot of Nintendo properties that you could imagine Sega doing. Like the way that they've, even with Metroid Dread, gone to Mercury Steam to make it more arcadey rather than more of a survival exploration game. I think you could make an argument that that's slightly more in Sega's wheelhouse than it is Nintendo's. And even stuff like Mario Kart, you can imagine that if without Mario, obviously, but you can imagine back in the day, if they'd come up with that idea first, you'd have been like, oh yeah, that's a Sega game.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good. The one, and the reason this came up, when I was doing my lists and I was looking at it, and on more than one occasion, I looked at it and went, oh, bugger, that's not Sega, is it? That's not even multi-platform. Is Road Rash.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I just always, partly because I only ever played it on a Mega Drive. And possibly, I can't remember. But
frighteningly enough, that's EA who made that.
Yeah, I know. But I never associate that it was on the SNES or anything like that. For me, that's a Mega Drive game.
Yeah.
That's all it is, because that's the only thing I ever... I had ability to play SNES games, but for me, it just felt, you're on motorbikes, but you can fight at the same time. That's a Sega thing. That's definitely the sort of thing you'd expect Sega to do. And it's just one of those. I was looking going, oh, that's not actually Sega. Same as I was just like, when we was going through my list, I went, oops, I broke my rules with the Dreamcast one. It's like Ferrari F355 Challenge, not a Sega game.
No. And
it's like, there are just some games you just go, it's a Sega. It's Sega in all but publisher and developer. So some teams get it. And in some ways, I think the indie scene keeps Sega alive as well. And I really hope they do sort of like continue to go strong as a publisher and keep producing risk-taking games. And they never, ever go safe. That'd be the worst thing Sega could do, is go safe.
Quite. And on that note, I think we'll probably have to end it there, although we could probably talk for several more hours because they're just amazing. But yes, so this history of Sega, story, difficult, challenging, but ultimately technically pushing the boundaries at every opportunity, and also taking lots and lots of experimental risks, and that's got to be applauded. It's amazing stuff.
Yep. And again, Sega do what Nintendo don't.
Yeah.
I was going to try and come up with something better to end, but I just went, I'll just repeat that phrase.
It's a good one. It's a classic for a reason. But yeah, no.
Yes.
Now that we're in, obviously, our 100th episode and we're in 2022, space year 2022, we've got all sorts of new plans. So I will hand over to you, Bradley, to talk about what the new year has, facing everybody and what it has for MHG in store.
So again, what's a year now? I'm calling it 2020.2 revision B. because it just feels like a continuation. Since we've hit the 20s, it's gone to crap, hasn't it, really? Can we just, like, skip to the 30s? Would that be easier?
It would. I'd go back further. I'd say since 2016, when Bowie died and Trump became president, it's all gone downhill since then.
We need Marty McFly to go back and, like, keep Trump alive? No, that's wrong. Keep Bowie alive.
Yeah. Kill Trump.
Don't keep Trump alive, yeah. Throw him down the escalator. And stop the Simpsons making predictions. That'll be something. But anyway, yeah, 2022 ahead for MHG. Some slight changes. Because of my vision, I've been sort of like, this last year, I've been all over the place and only really been able to concentrate on the podcast, because even though my eyes aren't working, my mouth still works, doesn't it, Stu?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah. But so the videos have all stopped, but I want to get back this year into producing more content, but it's going to be some slight restructuring as well, which isn't less content, nothing's stopping, in fact it's more. So the podcast, we're still going to look at doing a weekly podcast, which will be just the general stuff, but starting with this special, we're going to look to do something that's more in depth once a month. So we're looking at sort of like a look back on what's retro and emulation, and what, like, maybe a piracy special, specific games possibly, their effect on mental health, but they're going to be more in-depth specials rather than shoehorned into an existing podcast. It'll still be available in like the same stream, purely because I haven't worked out the best way of splitting it out. So you'll get your weekly podcast, and then once a month you'll get a special chucked in there as well. I'm going to try and get back to streaming. What I'm going to do is once a week. Again, when I did this before, I went overbearing on myself. I was going to try to hit a schedule of like, I've got to hit like 3 nights a week. I'm going to stream once a week. People watch, they don't. And then I'll get that all edited, uploaded to YouTube. So we get the YouTube videos going again. One thing I'm going to look at doing, because I know not everyone wants to listen to like an hour-long podcast at times to hear a bit of an opinion about a game, is I'm going to look at cutting out any specifics about a particular game and then putting that over video and sticking that as like clips on YouTube as well. So we're looking to expand there. There's going to be some more mental health articles, written articles on the site. Again, I've had to back out a little bit from that. One, because I've not actually felt the need to write them myself at the moment. I've been in a weird place concentrating on my physical health that I've not really known what to say with my mental health. But we've got more people who are going to start writing about that, more people who are interested in writing. So again, there's just going to be more content coming in, because 2021 was a bit of a slow year for what we was actually producing on the site. But it meant the podcast has grown what we think is really well. But yeah, keep an eye across all the channels. I'll send updates out on Twitter, things like that. And obviously this is back here. But yeah, there's going to be more coming. We're hoping for a much bigger 2022.
Superb, yeah. Yeah, and you're doing that all on your own, yeah? Because I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's part of my plan, to get rid of you, Stu.
I can't blame you. Yeah, no. Dead weight.
I'm going to start editing myself and everything.
Yeah.
Actually, don't go, Stu. Don't go.
Yeah, no, well, I'm going nowhere. Except now, because we're ending the podcast episode. So I will say goodbye to you all. I hope that you had a great holiday period. It can be challenging for people. Do reach out if you ever need any support. We're always here for you, and please use our Discord for that as well. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this really extended ramble about Sega, but I hope there was great content in there for you. Any mistakes on the history, they're all down to me, and Brad is completely absolved of that. But hopefully it was fun and useful. And apart from that, have a great rest of the week. Stay safe and stay sane.